Love You to Death, Stan Kraychik Mystery, Book 2. Writer Grant Michaels, publisher St. Martin's Press, New York, 1992. Narrator Eric Aust. Chapter 12. What goes around comes around. Driving out to Abigail by the Sea with Liz Carlini in her big British saloon certainly beat taking the train, both in time and in comfort. Riding in the speedy car was like being inside a soundproof bank vault. The thing probably cost the contents of one too, but it seemed the perfect vehicle for Liz Carlini to rush off dramatically and save her estranged husband from impending doom. Once we were underway, I asked her, "How long has Prentice been staying out at your summer place?" Her eyes flashed toward me, then shifted back onto the road, which was good since she was doing over 70. "Vanos, you might as well know the facts. Prentice and I are having a trial separation." I'd already guessed as much. "So there's more to it than just the business problems, right?" Liz squirmed but didn't answer. I pressed her. "Is it Danny?" Liz's face twisted in anguish, but no sound came from her. The snowy scenery whizzed by, and the only road noise was a muffled rush of air outside and a politely tempered hum from under the hood. A few minutes and many miles later, Liz regained composure from her tasteful breakdown and said, "I don't know who to turn to." I gave her my best empathic look to encourage her trust, but I couldn't stifle that damned internal voice that went, "Whom, not who." She went on, "I hate myself for suspecting anything. I know that they've become good friends from spending so much time together this past year, getting La Jourdain launched at all. But you're afraid it might be deeper than just friendship." "No, not anymore. I was wrong. I was foolish. I simple-minded, jealous fool. It was other people who made me suspicious. They seem to think that any close friendship between two men is suspect, but I know Prentice and I know Danny. Prentice loves me despite our recent problems, and I'm sure his interest in Danny is more fatherly than anything else." I didn't want to remind Liz that the kind of arrangement didn't exclude hanky-panky or even spanky. "And Prentice really wants children," she added, as though to exonerate her husband from any involvement beyond the platonic. "I'm sure he sees Danny as a son." Liz shook her head and sighed heavily, while her grip on the leather-bound steering wheel tightened and the car accelerated. "Perhaps this is all a mistake, coming out here like this. Maybe we should turn back. I'm sure Prentice and Danny are fine. They're probably sitting peacefully by the fire, and here I am barging in on them, looking like one of those possessive, neurotic wives who intrudes on her husband's privacy. Oh, God, I'm a fool." "Liz," I replied calmly, "it's okay. But I was thinking, just slow down, girl. This buggy's going too fast," I continued. "I know that Danny is still involved with Rafik, and I'm sure you're right. He's probably looking to Prentice for stability, which is exactly what Prentice can offer him. From what I know of Danny, he doesn't go after straight men. I'm sure there's nothing sexual between him and your husband." But the more I said, the faster the car seemed to go. Its 12 cylinders were on the verge of an impolite growl. "Actually, Vanos, what does it matter, especially if someone is trying to hurt Prentice? So what if he has a fling with a boy? So what if he wants to make him an heir?" "An heir?" Liz nodded. "Danny's in his will now," I protested, but Prentice wouldn't listen. "I think it's his guilt over inheriting his mother's fortune without a natural heir himself. Prentice feels he has to give his money away." "It is his to do with as he pleases, Liz." "But it's time for a change, not recklessness." "Hold that thought, Liz, and ease up on your right foot." But she sped up even more as she spoke. "Sometimes I think the Kingsley pedigree is nothing more than sludge. I wanted La Jourdain to show Prentice that everything eventually changes, even the Kingsley tradition. What if you and Prentice have a child? Wouldn't that continue the Kingsley line?" Liz smiled as though she knew a lovely secret. "That would certainly change things," she said. I wondered what the secret was. Perhaps she was pregnant. It would fit in with the image of the modern woman who has everything. But from what I could see, love between Liz and her husband was based on balance sheets, financial projections, and marketing demographics, rather than percale sheets throbbing projections, or pornographics. Then again, some people experience their most ecstatic moments with money in mind. I had to hand it to Liz Carlini. She was a woman who worked hard to put her life in order to control her destiny. But any fool knows that even the tiniest murder can ruin their best laid schemes. Suddenly, we heard a quiet beeping from under the dashboard. She immediately lit up on the gas, and we re-entered the sound barrier. I looked her way with alarm, and she smiled back. "Hey, Cole," she said as she picked up the car phone from the padded leather console between her seats. She obviously loved the glamour of receiving phone calls in her British touring sedan, but within seconds she slammed the phone back into the cradle. "Wrong number," she said. "So? I still get charged for them?" "You're kidding." "They eventually credit my bill, but it's months before it happens." At least the phone call had slowed us down. I asked Liz if the plans for opening La Jardin was still on, especially since a killing during the gala celebration might be interpreted as a bad omen. "That's medieval thinking. You've got to turn adversity into an advantage. I'm going to use all the publicity to help promote the business." "You can't let a little trouble with the police affect your plans." As we approached our destination, Liz turned off the highway and headed into the town center of Abigail. As though announcing our arrival, a delicate chime sounded from the dashboard, and an amber light flashed discreetly from the instrument panel. "Check petrol," Liz said. "I need gas." She pulled the car into the only filling station in Abigail, and old Salt came up to the window and greeted her. "Hello, Mrs. Kingsley. Back again?" she answered curtly. "Just filling, Ben." "How's she running now?" "The car is fine, Ben." "Right," he said, and went back about his work. Liz muttered to herself, "He insists on calling me Kingsley." Meanwhile, I was happy to see the old-fashioned, friendly English-speaking service was still alive in some places, especially if you were rich enough to live there. I asked Liz casually what had been wrong with the car, wondering how a vehicle costing as much as some houses could even so much as sputter. She explained somewhat defensively that it was just a minor adjustment and added, "These are still the most prestigious sports sedans on the road. I guess even a high-strung thoroughbred needs a little down-home love and attention." After filling the tank, Ben said, "Something going on at the house today, huh?" "Why?" answered Liz. "Oh, I saw Mr. Lau was here earlier, too." Liz suddenly looked worried. "Thanks, Ben," she said, and quickly started the car and pulled away from the pump. Then she put the big cat through its paces, swerving up the winding road like a shalom race. A little too sportive for my sensitive tummy. To the Kingsley summer house. Finally, we reached the top of the bluff, and for the second time in 2 days, I got to admire the view of the town and the marina from high up on the hill. It was a swell place for an ocean house. But when we arrived at the homestead, we had an unpleasant surprise. The roadway in front was lined with police cruisers. Flashers going, squawk boxes yapping. "Oh no!" Liz exclaimed. "Prentice!" We had a hard time getting by the two cops blocking the door. They didn't seem to recognize Liz Carlini as Prentice Kingsley's wife. I'm sure that her fey, red-headed companion didn't much help her credibility either. But Prentice himself appeared at the door and solved the problem. Liz clutched him in a desperate embrace. "Oh, Prentice, thank God you're all right. What happened? Was it John? Did he come here too?" Prentice held his wife close to him and advised her quietly but firmly. "Elizabeth, don't say anything until our attorney arrives." "But what happened?" "It's Daniel," he said icily. "He's dead." That stunned us both. I started to say that I'd just seen him in that very house yesterday afternoon, but I stopped myself. No one needed to know that, especially the police. Once Prentice had identified us, the police allowed us in, but they also quickly informed us that we'd be detained for questioning. When they took the three of us into the solarium, it may sound ghoulish, but my morbid curiosity wanted to know what had happened. I casually asked the officer who accompanied us, "Where's the body?" He didn't answer. I pressed him. "Was it an accident?" "Look, you," he said shortly. "You be quiet. You'll get your turn to talk." They left Liz and Prentice and me together in the solarium. Though it was freezing outside, the winter sun was toasty warm under the sparkling glass panels. I remembered the brief, sexy moments I'd spent with Rafik in that place. Just 24 hours ago, as I sat awaiting interrogation, I wondered where he was now. Liz spoke sotto voce to Prentice. John fired some shots at me this morning. That's ridiculous, whispered Prentice. I thought he might have come to hurt you too. Prentice gave his wife a hard, cold look. Elizabeth, he said, John is my brother, my half-brother, in fact. You still refuse to accept. He would not hurt you or me. Liz looked at me in exasperation. Vanos, please tell my husband what happened at our house this morning. I complied, politely saying, I wasn't there when it happened, but I can vouch for the broken windows and the bullet holes in the wall. There were real... So were the investigating cops. Liz insisted, I'm sure it was John who fired those shots. She faced her husband squarely. Who else would want me dead since he stands to inherit my share? Prentice answered her sharply as if instructing a stubborn child. No one will inherit anything until I die. You are accusing someone without proper evidence. John resents me. You imagine that. You always have. I've known John all my life, and he is not trying to hurt either of us. He's a hateful leech. He is my brother. Half-brother, retorted Liz as if to prove she'd learned the correct word. Then she turned away from her husband and sulked. A police officer arrived and asked her to go with him. As she left the solarium, Prentice said to her, Elizabeth, remember, don't answer anything until our attorney arrives. I can think for myself, Prentice, she said, and she set her jaw forward and walked away with the officer. Prentice Kingsley shook his distinguished head in dismay. Then he dropped his forehead into his upturned palms. I asked quietly, Who found Danny's body? He kept his head down as he spoke. I had just come back from my morning run. He was on his bed. Then Prentice Kingsley, heir to a mega-million-dollar chocolate fortune, began to sob quietly. He raised his head and looked at me with wet, red eyes. Do you know what they did to him? He moaned. His chin was quivering and his cheeks were streaked with tears. Did you see? I felt bad for him. He'd obviously been trying to keep his composure for his wife and the police, but now, seated along with me, he'd lost control. It's an effect I sometimes have on people. I'm sorry, I said. Do you want to tell me? My Slavic curiosity was hoping for excruciating detail. He bit his lip, then spoke. They took a gun. Yes. And they put it... He paused and suppressed another wave of sobbing that was building in his body. Go on, I encouraged him. It's best to say it. They put it in him. Then the sobbing won out, and he couldn't continue. I moved near to him and put my arm around his shoulder, and quickly discovered that Prentice Kingsley's retiring personality, now stirred to agony over the death of a young friend, couldn't hide his powerful body. It's strange how some men give the impression of softness and refinement, while possessing strong virile physiques beneath their clothes. At my touch, however, he jerked himself away. He heaved and cried and gasped for another few minutes, then stopped abruptly. Now my wife won't even listen to me. I sat and stared with a blank expression, one step removed from the shrink, who typically asked, Why do you feel that way? Eventually, people will talk themselves out into either resolution or impasse. Sure enough, Prentice Kingsley continued on his own without further prompting. My brother John, there's such a strain between him and my wife. He was always as easygoing and friendly, but when I married, and then when my wife hired Daniel to help with the new store, well, John became aloof. Little by little, it's become more open hostility, so much so that it's easy for my wife to blame him for any trouble we have now. As he talked, I stared at him with intense dispassion. The kind of look that cost over $100 an hour in a therapist office. It seemed to work, and he went on. Perhaps it comes from Elizabeth working so hard to get where she is. I've tried to tell her it doesn't matter anymore, that she doesn't have to strive so much. I remained silent. Why spoil a potential gush of information? When people have just experienced a major trauma, they often tell the most intimate things to a convenient stranger. How else do you think those funeral directors find out about the bank accounts and the trust funds and the investment portfolios? Prentice rambled on as if talking to himself. Where is my attorney? There's so much to be done now. I sensed his free flow of facts slowing down, so I tried a direct question. What about an heir? Prentice's eyes flickered angrily. Really, I think that is none of your business. I'd gone too far, stepped over the boundary of propriety, perhaps. Perished the thought that Prentice Kingsley and his vibrant young wife didn't do the job together. We sat together in silence until Liz returned to the solarium, this time with an officer of the local police, who was apologizing for the inconvenience all the nasty questions were causing her and her esteemed husband. Never mind the inconvenience to Dan Dougherty, wherever he was now. The same officer asked me to follow him to answer a few questions. I told him I had to use the bathroom first, which was a deceit to let me look around. He said okay, then led the way. As we passed by the bathroom where Danny's body was, I paused at the open doorway and gazed inside, taking it all in quickly before the cop realized I wasn't directly behind him. The most obvious thing was the blood. Red was everywhere in splatters and gobs and puddles. It was hard to imagine what a body held so much blood inside. Dan Dougherty was lying naked, face down on the bed. It took my mind a few seconds to realize what the fleshy gunk on the sheets meant. The gun had been shoved into him from behind and fired. My stomach heaved, and my ploy to use the bathroom became an urgent reality. I ran past the cop and got my head over the hopper just in time. The questioning that followed was routine and simple, at least for the moment. The local cops just wanted to know whether I'd known Danny and why I was there. I explained that both Dan Dougherty and Liz Carlini had been customers of mine and that Liz had invited me out with her today. I purposely didn't tell them about her suspicions concerning John Lau. That was only her side of things anyway. The police seemed friendly and cooperative enough, which further confirmed my theory that if you live in a wealthy community, even the police are nice. On my way back to the solarium, I paused once again at the bedroom door. Danny's body was now covered, which gave me a chance to notice something I hadn't seen earlier. On the nightstand near the bed was a heart-shaped box of La Jardin truffles, spattered with Danny's blood. The box was open, but from what I could see, none of the candy had been eaten. Again, I wondered where Rafik was. Minutes later, the police told me I could go, so I went to say goodbye to Liz and Prentice, who were finally in conference with their attorney. Liz seemed brighter now. Perhaps the all-knowing presence of their attorney had renewed her confidence. She even insisted on paying for a cab for my return trip to Boston. I protested the extravagance, but she convinced me, explaining that she'd asked me to accompany her out there in the first place. Then I reasoned she could afford it. Even with the cab ride back to town, I got there too late to pick up Tobias at the shop. I called Nicole at home and apologized for not returning sooner. Yet another of my broken promises. She seemed to accept it all in good spirits. Wondered, was Charles there tallying the chits on my personal Judgment Day account? And with Nicole being so pleasant, why did I still feel the floor dissolving from under me? Nikki, I was hesitantly not sure how to begin, what I had to tell her next. This whole shuffle and deal with Tobias will be over soon anyway. It will? She asked with little interest. Yes, Lorette Cole will be released soon, I promise. Stanley, what are you talking about? There's been another killing. Dan Dougherty was murdered in Abigail today. There's no way Branco can hold Lorette for that one. So that's what delayed you? Yes, Nikki, it was real life today. I recounted everything to her, from my visit to Liz Carlini's house in Chestnut Hill to my leaving Abigail by taxi. If I slyly censored some gruesome detail, she would instinctively sense the gap and pounce on me immediately and command me, "Tell me everything." Never skip details when dealing with a gossip monger, even if you have to contrive them. At the end of it all, Nicole said, "Darling, forgive me for doubting you. I had no idea what had happened. Would you like some time off tomorrow? Well deserved, if not earned." Thanks, Nikki, but I'm fine. I think, numb anyway. It hasn't sunk in yet. Call me if you have to. Sure, doll. She hung up, and I knew we were friends again. Alone, finally, and psychologically exhausted, I took a double shot of bourbon, scrubbed myself almost raw under a hot shower, then went to bed. I was asleep in seconds. Gay Mysteries audiobooks. I think it is easy to hate a label, but a face humanizes the word. So this effort is twofold: to offer comfort to those like myself that your world didn't end because you don't fit into the view of acceptable society on both sides, and in hopes of helping those with family that are LGBTQ, that it doesn't mean we are aliens from the child they once knew. Reassure them so they can maybe be supportive at the same time, being true to their values.